And then they go on tour at that point, and they take a band called Elf on tour with them. And Elf has a lead singer named Ronnie James Dio. And the rest of that is history as well. Richie hears Ronnie singing and realizes that he could do a solo thing with Ronnie as his vocalist. At that point, he leaves Deep Purple. He starts Rainbow with Elf as a band, except he kicks their guitarist out and inserts himself as the guitarist and swallows up Elf, basically. So he gets Ronnie James Dio. He gets the rest of the band, Elf, minus their guitarist, and that's his new solo band called Rainbow.
And I guess they accepted it because Blackmore was legendary at that point.
Oh yeah, he's going to make them. He's going to make names for all of them.
Right, except for the guitar player they kicked out.
Right. He ends up, he ends up having his Pete Best moment. Yeah, they do the first album, and it's a good album. And shortly after they put that album out, Richie realizes this band is limited in its talent, other than for Dio. So he sacks everybody but Dio. So after he sacks the initial band, he replaces them with Cozy Powell on drums, Jimmy Bain on bass, and Tony Carey on keyboards, and you have a much stronger band. And Cozy Powell immediately affects the entire sound of the band and takes it to another level. His drumming in the Rainbow stuff is just magical and powerful, and it's such a huge part of what their sound became.
That second album is so insanely heavy. It's just it blows your head off.
Right. And then they do a third album with Cozy and Ronnie Dio, and they change the keyboard player and they change the bass player to Bob Daisley. And the keyboard player, I believe, is Mark Stone on Long Live Rock and Roll.
David Stone.
David Stone. And for my money, that's the best of the three albums. I know a lot of people like Rising better. I think Long Live Rock and Roll, they get the right balance between shorter songs and epic songs. And it's just the level of magnitude goes up. And for example, some of the best harmonies you'll ever hear Ronnie James Dio sing are on Long Live Rock and Roll. He just does a lot of 3-part harmony work on that. The drums are spectacular and part of the composition. And Cozy Powell gets credit for writing credit for things like Kill the King because his drum parts are such a important part of the song. It's a magical album. That's the one that has Gates of Babylon on it, which we listened to. Terrific stuff. And then Richie gets tired of that and wants to go in a more pop direction and realizes that, he's pretty much run his course with heavy rock in that respect. And he wants to take things into a more radio friendly sort of direction. And he has a conversation with Ronnie James Dio, and he says, I want to do things like love songs. And Ronnie says, I don't do love songs. So that band splits up. He ends up getting Graham Bonnet. I believe he's also credited for finding Graham Bonnet, who really wasn't the name before that. Graham Bonnet becomes part of Rainbow. It was an odd mix. They did one album called Down to Earth. There are 2 tracks on that are standout tracks. One of them is All Night Long. The other one is Since You've Been Gone, both of which were radio friendly compared to the Dio stuff. But Graham Bonnet doesn't have a classically radio friendly voice either. He's a guy who has a sort of somewhere in the middle voice, and he's a very intense sounding singer at times. And very brash sounding at times. So if you're looking for like pop radio sensibility, Graham Bonnet isn't going to be your guy either. So after one album with that lineup, he regroups yet again and eventually finds Joe Lynn Turner, who has a nice smooth pop voice, but can also sing some bluesy rock. And, a lot of the 80s stuff is characterized by the Joe Lynn Turner era. And they did Difficult to Cure and I believe it was Straight Between the Eyes. What's the name of the second album?
Straight Between the Eyes.
Straight Between the Eyes.
82.
With Joe Lynn Turner, and they ended up they got some radio play. They got things like Stone Cold and what was the other hit? I think they had a hit with Stone Cold and they had a hit with Power. Both of them were minor hits. They were not like, top of the charts hits, but they had some minor hits. They were on MTV. They were doing things like that. And in 1983, late 83, early 84, there's talk of reforming Deep Purple Mark II.
And they also put a third album out called Bent Out of Shape, I see.
That was later.
83.
83 was Bent Out of Shape?
According to Wikipedia, yeah.
You're probably right, yeah. Yeah, you're right. But after that happened, there was a move to get Deep Purple Mark II back together. And that happened in 1984. And they got the whole Mark II lineup back together. Ritchie Blackmore, Ian Gillan, Ian Pace, John Lord, and Roger Glover. And they came together and they buried the hatchet for a short time and came up with one of the greatest comeback albums of all time called Perfect Strangers. Yes. And that album was such a joy for everybody who was a Deep Purple fan, because you don't expect, they're coming back 10 years after they broke up, basically. And they came back with such a ferocious album that had all of the sounds and sonics and classic Deep Purple-isms you wanted to hear. And Ritchie was on fire on that album. Everybody was on fire on
but
that
it
album.
also had like that 80s sound to it a little bit, It was definitely...
Maybe just a little bit of it. I mean, the first thing you hear on the first song you hear is the John Lord organ.
Yeah.
And it's like, we're all sitting around waiting for, we've been hearing the new Deep Purple albums coming. They've reunited and everything. And they're finally going to debut this song on MTV to hear what they've come up with. And the first thing you hear is the John Lord organ going through the Marshall, and you get this big smile on your face.
Right.
Because it's like, there it is.
Yeah.
There it is. It's just like they're back. And it was a wonderful album and a wonderful tour. I saw the tour. They were having fun with each other in a way that they probably had never had. And it was one of the great concerts I've seen in my life, that reunion tour. It was basically, you get all of the old stuff played live plus a bunch of the new stuff played live. They played for over 2 hours. It was fantastic. Blackmore was on fire. Ian Gillan singing Child in Time like a demon. And, all of the stuff that everything you wanted a reunion of that band to be, it was. It didn't disappoint on any level whatsoever. And
I love the title track too, Perfect Strangers. That's such a great tune too.
Yeah, it is. But pretty much every tune on that album is fantastic.
Yeah, true.
It's as good an album as they've made in the 70s in some ways. Maybe not as iconic, right? But just from a standpoint of it as an album, it's as strong an album as they ever released. And so they tooled along with that for a bit, and they had a follow-up which was nowhere near as good, called House of Blue Light. It had a couple of good songs on it, and they toured that. And I think that's where the wheels started to come off again, and all the old arguments and dislikes started to show up again. And for whatever reason, they decided to do one more, and they called it The Battle Rages On. And that's a decent album too, but by then the tour was getting out of hand. The infighting between Gillan and Blackmore was becoming too much for the rest of the band.
But they broke up between that, right?
Ritchie left during a tour.
Okay.
And there was, I think, the famous incident of the spaghetti throwing incident or something like that. Again, if you go on YouTube and you Google, Richie Blackmore, yeah, they were messing with each other, Blackmore and Gillan, and there's a live video that of the night that they had that problem, and like, I forget what the name of the video is. I should look that up. Hang on a second.
But I see that they had a lineup with Joe Lynn Turner on vocals, and they put an album out, Slaves and Masters, between the House of Blue Light and The Battle Rages On.
Right. You're right. Between House of Blue Light and The Battle Rages On, they do a Deep Purple album with Joe Lynn Turner. A lot of people like this album. It's a little bit, I can't really go down that road personally so much. And then they get back together for this last roundup called The Battle Rages On. And there's a live video. I don't remember what, it's a concert video that you could buy. And it happened to capture early on the part of the problems that were going on in the band. The band hit the stage with Highway Star, and there's no Richie Blackmore.
He just didn't.
And it's just bass and keyboards and drums and Ian Gillan singing. And for the whole first verse, there's no Richie Blackmore on stage. And then somewhere after the first verse, he wanders out on stage and starts playing. And somewhere in the middle of the song, he throws a cup of water at Ian Gillan. It splashes all over Gillan and John Lord. And, they just did not get along. And I think that was around the same time of this backstage incident where Ian Gillan had poured ketchup on Richie's food, and Richie found out. He smashed a plate of food in Ian Gillan's face. And, they almost came to blows over that. And I think, what happened was Richie walked off the tour, and that was the end of Richie and Deep Purple. I mean, the final end of Richie and Deep Purple. And that's when they got Joe Satriani to come and fill in for the rest of the tour dates.
And then they had 2 more lineups, I think. And then,
we didn't talk about Mark IV. Mark IV was when he originally left for Rainbow, but this is about Richie. But I mean,
yeah, sure.
So Mark IV had Tommy Bolin on guitar. It's a really good album in some respects, but most people don't think it sounds very much like Purple. And it was a big drop off because it was a different kind of thing. Now, the thing with Deep Purple was whenever they had a lineup change, they were not trying to recreate what they had already done. They were always trying, as musicians, they were always trying to go into new territory and new areas. So when Richie first left in 1974, 75 or whatever it was, they didn't want a Richie Blackmore clone. They wanted someone completely different as a player. Obviously they wanted someone different as a personality too, because he was so difficult. And the same thing happened later on when he left in the 90s. And after Joe Satriani left to continue his solo career, they needed a new guitarist, and they picked up Steve Morse, another guy who's a really good player, but sounds nothing like Blackmore.
Right.
So they never were trying to, put a Blackmore clone in just so that their old material would sound more authentic. They just, kept trying to do different kinds of music. But that's sort of the discography, if you will, of the classic Blackmore era of, his prime.
It's a pretty incredible body of work.
Yeah, it is, and it stands up to this day.
Is there? Does Rainbow have a live or made in Japan equivalent live album? Or
it's not quite that good. There's one that's live in Germany or live in Munich or something like that. That you can find that one, and there's a video of it and an album of it. It's good, but it's on the rising. Well, it's right before Long Live Rock and Roll gets released. So the rising stuff is there. You get Kill the King, you get Long Live Rock and Roll, and you get Stargazer and things like that. So it's a good album. It's not in the same class as Made in Japan, but it's a good album.